So welcome to the show. So one of the topics I definitely wanted to cover today was going to be Elizabeth Warren, how she gave a speech at her CNN town hall about impeaching Donald Trump off of the findings in the Mueller report. So I feel like there's a lot of hypocrisy on the left going on right now, and among progressives, I mean, when I say the left, about the topic of impeachment. So I'll get into more detail about what I mean by that, but first let me show you the clip of Elizabeth Warren talking about impeaching Donald Trump.
You have called for impeachment proceedings to be initiated against President Trump. What do you say to those Democrats who say, look, this is not the time, it's going to take away focus from winning in 2020? Speaker Pelosi told her caucus again just today that she has no plans to immediately initiate impeachment proceedings.
So there is no political inconvenience exception to the United States Constitution. This one is, if I can, I want to take a little time on this because I think this is really important. Last Thursday, I'd been to South Carolina. This was all about climate change. That's where I was, South Carolina, coastal communities that were protesting offshore drilling. I then came to Colorado, the biggest drought in 1,200 years. And then to Utah, where they had one of the worst wildfire seasons in a generation. And I'm on an airplane coming back and the Mueller report drops. And so I start reading it on the airplane. I read it on through the evening. I read it into the wee hours of the morning. And when I get to the end, three things just jump off the page. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, an independent, a libertarian, a vegetarian. Three things just totally jump off the page. The first is that a hostile foreign government attacked our 2016 election in order to help Donald Trump. The evidence is just there. Read it, footnote after footnote, page after page documentation. Part two, Donald Trump welcomed that help. So on the first one about what they did, understand, this was a sophisticated attack. They attacked part of the voting system. That's going to be an ongoing federal investigation. They hacked into more than 50 computers at the DNC, the DCCC, a very serious attack. And Donald Trump welcoming it in the Mueller report. Just read it. He gets off the phone from an unnamed caller and looks up and says to the other person in the phone, there are more leaks coming. The idea that he was welcoming what was happening from the Russian government, and by the summer of 2016, the report documents that by that point, the Trump campaign actually had a worked out formal process for dealing with the leaks that were coming in from the Russians. So that's part two. Part three is when the federal government starts to investigate part one and part two. Donald Trump took repeated steps aggressively to try to halt the investigation, derail the investigation, push the investigation somewhere else, but otherwise keep that investigation from going forward and turning into a serious investigation about a hostile foreign government that attacked us and about his own personal interests. So here's how I see this. If any other human being in this country had done what's documented in the Mueller report, they would be arrested and put in jail. Obstruction of justice is a serious crime in this country. But Mueller believed, because of the directions from Donald Trump's Justice Department, that he could not bring a criminal indictment against a sitting president. So I think he's wrong on that, but that's what he believed. So he serves the whole thing up to the United States Congress and says, in effect, if there's going to be any accountability, that accountability has to come from the Congress. And the tool that we are given for that accountability is the impeachment process. This is not about politics. This is about principle. This is about what kind of a democracy we have. In a dictatorship, Everything in government revolves around protecting the one person at the center, but not in our democracy and not under our Constitution. We have checks and balances, and we have to proceed here in a way, understanding our place in history, that not only protects democracy now, but protects democracy when the next president comes in, and the next president, and the president after that.
But
that's our responsibility.
But you started off by talking about some of your travels and people talking about climate change and their concerns and tabletop issues.
Yes.
Doesn't putting a lot of Democrats focused on impeaching the president, which is not going to pass in the Senate, it's not really going to go anywhere in that sense, doesn't that take away focus from the tabletop issues that you and other Democrats say they want to run on?
So, let me just say, if you've actually read the Mueller report, it's all laid out there. It's not like it's going to take a long time to figure this out. It's there. It's got the footnotes. It's got the points. It connects directly to the law. But this really is fundamentally, I took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And so did everybody else in the Senate and in the House. And I believe that every person in the Senate and the House ought to have to vote and to say either, yeah, that's okay with me. Yeah, let a president just step in the way he did when he told the White House counsel to go fire Mueller, and then told the White House counsel to go lie about having told the White House counsel to go fire Mueller, and then told the White House counsel to write a letter saying that Donald Trump had not told him to go fire Mueller, and then to say, why on earth would you take notes about what I said to you? The lawyers I deal with never put anything in writing. If there are people in the House or the Senate who want to say that's what a president can do when the president is being investigated for his own wrongdoings, or when a foreign government attacks our country, then they should have to take that vote and live with it for the rest of their lives.
Okay, so now what I am going to say about what Elizabeth Warren was saying there is I do think it was a little bit grandstandy. I do think that it was a little bit, what would be the best word to say? I do think it's a little bit, I don't want to say corny, but along those lines. But in terms of what Elizabeth Warren is saying, and you could say almost any politician has been hypocritical on the topic of impeachment, because there's almost impeachable offenses with every president that we get in. So there is stuff that Obama did in terms of foreign intervention that is impeachable. There is plenty of stuff that George W. Bush did in terms of foreign intervention that's impeachable. But when you come down to what Donald Trump does, we're talking about being principled here, and just, we're not saying that all of these politicians are principled, but we're saying sticking to our principles in terms of what we want done as constituents. So if you're talking about Donald Trump breaking the law where there's clear obstruction of justice going on, then yes, I think most progressives would say in a vacuum, yes, try to impeach. If you had a majority in the Senate of Democrats, you had a majority in the House, yes, go ahead and impeach off of that. But at the same time, then I think there's also this contingent, and it makes sense. I partly agree with this contingent that, hey, you know what, it's not going to be good politically if we decide to do something like that, because partially we don't have the Senate, so it's not going to go through. We're not actually going to impeach Donald Trump if we introduce impeachment proceedings in the House. But at the same time, we also have the fact that Donald Trump is breaking the law brazenly right in front of our faces, and there's clear obstruction here. Are we going to be principled and hold his feet to the fire about that? And the reason that I keep bringing up being principled about the issues here is progressives, for the most part, are very principled on the issues. We want Medicare for all. Stuff like the Green New Deal, I think most progressives have a consensus on these policies, and they want them to be introduced to the House, and they want them to be brought forward as serious issues that need addressing. And I think the same thing applies for the impeachment of Donald Trump, because at the end of the day, we know if we have any kind of hearing on whether it's Medicare for all, whether it's a Green New Deal, whether it's tuition-free public college, whether it's the legalization of marijuana. Could it maybe pass the House? I mean, in the case of something like Medicare for All, probably wouldn't pass the House anyway, even with the Democratic majority, just because there's so many centrist Democrats that are still in the party at this point in time in Washington, D.C. But at the same time, let's say it did pass. It's not going to pass the Senate. Mitch McConnell's not going to let that pass. But the whole point is that you want them to be bringing these topics up because they're relevant topics and are important. And you also want them to introduce legislation for something like Medicare for All because we're principled and we say, hey, you're a progressive, you're part of the left elected you to go down there and fight for priorities such as Medicare for All and free college, Green New Deal, things of that nature. So go ahead and fight for them and introduce legislation to have votes on in the House. And if they pass the House, great, then it'll get shot down in the Senate and we know where the Republicans lie in the Senate. And it draws a line in the sand. Republicans don't want this. Democrats are in favor of it and are trying to fight for these issues. And that tells the voters, hey, we're principled. We're fighting for these issues, even when they're probably not going to pass because of a Republican majority Senate and Donald Trump is the president of the United States. But now where I think it gets a little bit hypocritical is that people then all of a sudden come after Elizabeth Warren for wanting to impeach him based on the principled stance that he's not above the law and that there's clear obstruction in the Mueller report. So do you introduce impeachment and just be principled saying, you know what, we're supposed to do what we're supposed to do, and if there's clear obstruction of justice and the president is breaking the law, we're supposed to file for the articles of impeachment against him. So the whole point of what I'm saying is, I think a lot of progressives say, hey, no matter whether you're going to pass something like Medicare for All or not, bring those bills up in Congress. Bring them to Washington, D.C., make them aware of them, say that's where you stand, and that you're going to fight for that. I'm not saying to make, I know the establishment media is going to make the whole thing about impeachment leading up to 2020. And I agree that it's probably not the best political strategy. And I think me and Kyle Kalinske of Secular Talk actually disagree on this because I was watching his video earlier and he was kind of going after Elizabeth Warren, that she's being hypocritical because of things such as Obama and George W. Bush doing things that were impeachable as well, and nobody was piping up saying, hey, let's impeach these guys or try and hold criminal charges against them after they're out of office. So the whole point of what I'm trying to get at here is the fact that, yeah, that's hypocritical of Elizabeth Warren to not have brought those things up before, and it's self-serving to now then be like, all right, well, it's not somebody like Obama that's on our team per se. So Donald Trump, yeah, we hate Donald Trump. Let's introduce impeachment to the House now to get him out of there. But you weren't always on a principled stance such as that. So it's right to critique Elizabeth Warren on that part of it. But then the part where I disagree is that does not mean that then you say, well, you know what? We shouldn't impeach for political reasons and the imagery of it and whether that may give Donald Trump a boost in popularity, because then that kind of goes against what I feel like a lot of people are saying do all of the time, which is fight for these progressive priorities. If you're a progressive congressman or woman, and even if they're not going to pass the Senate, because they're not going to pass the Senate, they may not even pass the House, and obviously they're not getting past Donald Trump's desk. But at the same time, we got to be principled. We fight for what we believe in. We introduce the legislation that we believe in, and we fight for that legislation. And we say in detail why we want that. Now, do I think Elizabeth Warren was being hyperbolic about all of the Russia stuff and how they attacked us? Yes, I think that rhetoric's too strong. I think we got to tone it back on the Russia, because some people then take Russia attacking us as, you know what, this is something that is like a war between us and Russia, or it's like Russia is literally attacking us like in a more literal sense. And I don't want people to think like that, because at the end of the day, yes, the Mueller report came out with some very damning things about Donald Trump. And yes, Donald Trump is corrupt. And yes, Donald Trump has some very suspicious ties to Russian oligarchs. But at the same time, that does not mean, and Russia did do hacking. They hacked the DNC. They tried to hack voting machines in 2016. But at the same time, there's no evidence that they changed any votes at all. At all. So that part, I think, people are taking it too far, and they're trying to frame it as a thing that's even bigger than it is to get people like really riled up. And I don't want that, because the Russia attacking our election is not a main priority right now. That's far below even the Donald Trump impeachment thing, far below it. And it's far less important. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with the Donald Trump impeachment part of this. The Donald Trump impeachment part is because of the obstruction of justice. And I mean, I'm sure with the Southern District of New York and all the trials and all of the investigations that are going on into Donald Trump's corruption outside of the Mueller report as well, that there would be even more reason for impeachment if we waited for the findings of those investigations. But at the same time, you gotta just stay principled on your stance. Do you think Donald Trump should be impeached? Yes or no? And I mean, if you disagree with me, that's fine. And I know there's plenty of people on the left that do disagree with me, but I'm just asking you to hear me out, open-minded on what I'm saying the stance of most people are. And if you want to stick to that stance, then you don't want to stray from it when it all of a sudden comes to a thing where it's because of political optics. Because, for instance, the fact that Bernie Sanders was talking about letting the people from prison vote, and yes, he has a principled stance on that, and corporate media is trying to kind of go after that and inflame that a little bit and make that into a big thing, because that's not actually popular with the American people. That's one of the few policy ideas for Bernie Sanders that isn't among what the mainstream supports in America right now. So he doesn't have a majority of support on that particular issue. Now, he can fight for that issue, and he can continually fight for that issue, and he can make his case and try and sway people over. And who knows, maybe it's the same thing with some of these other progressive policy proposals, and I assume that it probably would be, where it will continuously gain popularity the more people are hit with the information about it and the facts of the situation and why it should be done. But at the moment, that is something that is not very popular. Does that mean that Bernie Sanders should not stand by that and that he shouldn't fight for that issue because it's not popular? Even though he feels that that is the right thing. I think that a good amount of people that are progressives do feel that that stance of letting people vote from prison is the right thing for our democracy. But the whole point of that is, should you just stop because that's unpopular and that may hurt him in political points? Maybe you shouldn't draw like the biggest spotlight on it. Obviously, you don't want to build your platform around it. Build it around Medicare for all, free college, legalization of marijuana, getting out of the wars like Afghanistan and Iraq. Those things are the most important things to be the billboard material. But does that mean when he's asked about it that he backs down off of that? Or that he still doesn't fight for that issue? No, he still should fight for that issue. If he's principled and that's what he believes in, even if it's unpopular with the American people, he should make his case for it. And he should give them the facts and the information that he has that support what he's going for, and see how many people open their eyes to his case and continue to fight for it because he believes that's what's right. So in this case, if Elizabeth Warren, I know she's hypocritical because she could have fought for impeachment for other presidents. And yes, she could have. But at the same time, is it a principled stance for progressives right now to say, you know what, the president isn't above the law and he should be, and there should be impeachment hearings over the fact that he broke the law and did obstruction of justice? And that we have the evidence right in front of our face that he did do it and he did it brazenly. So does that mean that we just drop a principled stance for political points on this particular one? I don't think so.